If he proposed, would you say yes? Someone asked my girlfriend at a party. She laughed and said, you know, I'm not trying to marry someone like him. He's fine for now, but that's it. I didn't say a word. Just left. The ring box in my jacket pocket felt heavier with each step toward the door. I'd been standing in Derek's kitchen, grabbing another beer from the cooler when I heard Madison's voice carry over the music from the living room. Derek had just bought his first place, a modest townhouse in northeast Minneapolis, and we were celebrating with about 30 people crammed into his space. I should have been happy. My best friend since we aged out of foster care together had finally made it, had something that was truly his. Instead, I was listening to the woman I'd planned to propose to that very night explain to her circle of friends why she'd never marry a paramedic instructor who drives a converted ambulance and lives in a duplex. Madison's just being realistic, one of her real estate colleagues said. She needs someone who can match her lifestyle, you know? Blake's sweet, but he's not exactly executive material. Exactly, Madison replied, and I could hear that particular laugh she used when she wanted to sound sophisticated. I mean, he teaches CPR classes at a community college for extra money. It's embarrassing when my clients ask what my boyfriend does for work. I usually just say he's in emergency services and let them assume he's a firefighter or something impressive. The bottle slipped in my hand, nearly crashing to Derek's new kitchen floor. 3 years. 3 years of her keeping spare uniforms at my place, joining me for volunteer shifts at the homeless shelter, meeting me after my late classes with coffee and encouragement. 3 years of what I thought was building something real with someone who understood that I'd chosen a career helping people over chasing money. I'd grown up in the system, bounced between relatives who saw me as a burden after my grandmother died when I was 15. Foster homes where I counted down days until 18, when I could finally stop pretending anyone actually wanted me around. Madison knew all of this. She'd held me when I talked about those years, told me she admired how I'd turned my experiences into motivation to help others. Apparently, admiring it and wanting to marry it were two very different things. The worst part is he actually thinks we're building towards something serious, Madison continued, her voice getting that edge it had when she'd had too many drinks at her work events. Like, he talks about saving for a house together, starting a family. It's actually kind of sad how he doesn't realize he's just a phase. I need someone with actual ambition, someone who wants more than just getting by. I set the beer down and walked toward the front door, each word hitting like a physical blow. The engagement ring I'd bought with 8 months of savings felt like it was burning through my jacket. I'd planned everything perfectly, propose tonight at Derek's party surrounded by the people who mattered most, then take her to that overlook by Lake Minnetonka where she'd first told me she loved me. Instead, I was learning that everything I thought I knew about us was a lie. Derek caught my arm as I reached for the door handle. Blake, man, where are you going? Party's just getting started. I looked back toward the living room where Madison was still holding court, probably moving on to critiquing my converted ambulance or my tendency to pick up extra shifts at the fire station. She hadn't even noticed I'd been gone from her side for 20 minutes. I need to get to work, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I had a late shift teaching emergency response courses at Minneapolis Community College, something Madison apparently found mortifying enough to lie about to her colleagues. Derek's face softened with understanding. He knew about the ring, had helped me pick it out. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, already halfway out the door. Everything's exactly what it should be. I drove through the quiet Minneapolis streets in my converted ambulance, the vehicle Madison had once called quirky, but apparently described to others as embarrassing. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was heading to teach a roomful of aspiring EMTs and firefighters how to save lives while processing the fact that the woman I'd wanted to spend my life with thought my dedication to helping people made me unmarriageable. The community college was nearly empty at 10 p.m., just security guards and a few night classes still in session. My students were already gathering in the training room when I arrived, a mix of young people trying to break into emergency services and older folks adding certifications to existing careers. People who understood that some work mattered more than the paycheck it provided. I taught that class like my life depended on it, throwing myself into demonstrations of chest compressions and airway management, Anything to keep my mind off the conversation I'd overheard. These students looked at me with respect, asked thoughtful questions about protocols and procedures, treated my knowledge like it had value. The contrast with Madison's dismissive comments was stark and painful. When class ended at midnight, I sat alone in the empty training room, still wearing my instructor polo with the college logo, still carrying an engagement ring for a woman who saw me as a temporary placeholder until someone better came along. My phone had been buzzing with texts from Madison for the past 2 hours, probably wondering where I'd disappeared to at Derek's party. I turned it off without reading them. Some conversations required more preparation than emergency response training, and I wasn't ready for the one that was coming. I'd met Madison 2 years ago when I responded to a medical emergency at one of her open houses in Edina, an upscale suburb where million-dollar lakefront properties were her specialty. A potential buyer had collapsed from what turned out to be a minor heart episode, and I was first on scene as part of my paramedic duties with Hennepin County. While other real estate agents might have panicked about liability or lost sales, Madison had stayed calm, helped me gather medical history from the man's wife, and even followed up at the hospital later that day to check on his recovery. I'd been impressed by her composure and genuine concern for someone she'd just met. When she asked if I wanted to grab coffee to decompress after what had been a scary situation for everyone involved, I said yes without hesitation. Our first real conversation lasted 4 hours at a small cafe in Minneapolis, and I found myself drawn to her intelligence and apparent empathy. She asked thoughtful questions about my work, seemed genuinely interested when I explained how I'd transitioned from street paramedic to also teaching emergency response courses. Madison told me about her journey in luxury real estate, how she'd worked her way up from showing starter homes to representing some of the most exclusive properties in the Twin Cities area. She drove a leased BMW that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, but she never made me feel inadequate about my converted ambulance or my modest duplex in a working-class neighborhood of Minneapolis. At least, not at first. I should have paid closer attention to the small comments that started appearing after our 6-month mark. The way she'd suggest I park my ambulance around the corner when we met her colleagues for drinks. How she'd steer conversations away from my teaching job and focus on my paramedic work, which sounded more respectable to her real estate crowd. She started bringing up Derek's promotion from construction worker to project supervisor more frequently, using him as an example of advancement and taking the next step. But I'd been so grateful to find someone who seemed to accept my unconventional path that I ignored these red flags. My background made me desperate to believe someone could love me exactly as I was. I'd entered foster care at 15 when my grandmother died, the last relative willing to take responsibility for a teenager with behavioral issues stemming from years of neglect. My parents had been addicts who disappeared when I was 7, leaving me to be raised by a grandmother who did her best with limited resources but died of diabetes complications just as I was starting high school. The relatives who grudgingly took me in made it clear I was a burden they'd accepted out of obligation, not love. I spent those 3 years feeling like I was constantly proving my worth, trying to be invisible enough not to cause problems but helpful enough to justify my presence. Aging out at 18 had been both terrifying and liberating. Finally, I was responsible only to myself, but I also had no safety net if I failed. I'd worked full-time while getting my EMT certification, then my paramedic license, driven by a need to help people the way no one had really helped me. The teaching component came later, when I realized I could multiply my impact by training others to save lives. My duplex wasn't much to look at from the outside. A 1950s building in northeast Minneapolis that I rented for $800 a month, but I'd made it home in ways I'd never experienced as a kid. The converted ambulance had been a practical purchase from a retiring paramedic, but I'd grown attached to its reliability and the conversations it started with curious neighbors. Madison had seemed charmed by these quirks initially, even keeping spare uniforms at my place so she could join me for volunteer shifts at the homeless shelter. She'd photographed my ambulance for her Instagram with captions about authentic living and real heroes, posts that got hundreds of likes from her followers who thought dating a first responder was trendy. Derek had been skeptical from early on, though he'd never said anything directly until recently. Derek understood my background because he'd lived it too. We'd met in our last foster placement and stayed close through aging out and the difficult years that followed. He'd worked construction since 18, slowly moving up from day laborer to equipment operator to project supervisor. His new townhouse represented 15 years of careful saving and smart decisions, proof that kids like us could build stable lives despite our beginnings. Something's off about how she talks about your work, Derek had mentioned a few weeks ago when we were installing new fixtures in his kitchen. Like, she's proud of you when it's convenient, but she gets weird when people ask specific questions about what you actually do. I defended Madison then, explaining that her world was different, that luxury real estate required a certain image consciousness that didn't always translate well to blue-collar realities. Derek had just nodded and changed the subject, but I could see the concern in his expression. Now, sitting in my empty classroom with an engagement ring that would never be used, I realized Derek's instincts had been better than mine. Madison hadn't been protecting my privacy when she deflected questions about my career, she'd been ashamed of it. The spare uniforms at my place weren't a sign of commitment but convenience. The volunteer shifts she joined weren't about sharing my values but about getting Instagram content that made her look socially conscious. I'd spent 2 years building what I thought was a partnership with someone who saw me as a stepping stone to something better. The irony was that I'd been planning to propose because I thought we'd found balance between our different worlds. I made enough between my paramedic salary and teaching income to live comfortably, if modestly. Madison's real estate commissions were unpredictable but potentially lucrative, especially in Minneapolis' hot housing market. I'd imagined us combining resources to buy a house, maybe starting a family, building the kind of stable home I'd never had as a kid. Instead, I'd learned that she saw my financial situation as something to be endured temporarily, not shared permanently. Her colleagues' comments about needing someone who could match her lifestyle made it clear that Madison had been discussing our relationship in terms of economic compatibility, not emotional connection. I'd never be able to afford the kind of lifestyle her BMW and designer clothes suggested she wanted, and apparently, she'd never intended for me to try. 4 days after Derek's party, I let Madison's calls go straight to voicemail while I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised even my colleagues. I picked up every available shift at the hospital, volunteered for additional training courses at the community college, and spent my off hours at the fire station helping with equipment maintenance. The Minneapolis Fire Department had been like a second family since I'd started volunteering there, and the physical work of checking hoses and cleaning trucks gave me something to focus on besides the constant buzzing of my phone. Madison's texts started confused and slightly annoyed, typical of someone who wasn't used to being ignored. "Blake, where did you disappear to last night? Derek said you left early. Call me back." By day 2, the tone shifted to concern mixed with frustration. "I don't know what's going on, but this silent treatment is really immature. We're adults. We can talk about whatever's bothering you." Day 3 brought longer messages with increasing desperation. "Blake, I'm seriously worried now. This isn't like you. Please just tell me what happened. Did someone say something at the party? I know my work friends can be snobbish sometimes, but don't take it personally." The irony of that last message wasn't lost on me. She thought her friends had been the problem, not her own words. I finally responded with a single text. "I heard what you said about me at Derek's party. I need some time to think." Her response came within minutes, a wall of text that confirmed she knew exactly which conversation I meant. "Blake, please don't take that seriously. I was drinking and trying to fit in with those stupid women from my office. You know how they are, all they care about is money and status. I was just saying what they wanted to hear. It didn't mean anything. Please call me back so we can talk about this properly." But the follow-up texts revealed more than she probably intended. "I can explain everything if you'll just give me a chance. The things I said don't reflect how I really feel about you. I love you exactly as you are. Please don't throw away 3 years over one stupid conversation." The phrasing bothered me. She loved me exactly as I was, which implied she'd been settling all along, managing her disappointment rather than appreciating what we had. Madison escalated her campaign when texts didn't work. She showed up at my duplex on Wednesday morning, banging on the door until my neighbor Mrs. Chun came out to see what the commotion was about. I watched from my bedroom window as Madison tried to explain to my elderly neighbor that she was my girlfriend and needed to make sure I was okay. Mrs. Chin, who'd lived through enough drama to recognize it when she saw it, politely but firmly told Madison that if I wasn't answering my door, I probably didn't want to be disturbed. Thursday brought flowers to the fire station, an expensive arrangement that made the guys tease me mercilessly about having a fancy girlfriend who sent apology bouquets. Captain Rodriguez pulled me aside after the ribbing got too loud. "Everything okay at home, Blake? You've been working like a man trying to outrun something." I'd always respected Rodriguez. He'd come up through the ranks the hard way and had a gift for reading people under stress. "Just some relationship stuff, Cap. Nothing that affects my work." Didn't say it did. But whatever's going on, hiding at the station isn't going to solve it. Sometimes you've got to face the fire to put it out. Friday morning, Madison tracked down Derek at his construction site, demanding to know what had happened at his party and why I was avoiding her. Derek called me during his lunch break, sounding exhausted. "Man, your girl showed up at my job site looking like she hadn't slept in days. Had to pull her aside before my crew started staring. She's convinced someone at the party said something terrible about her, wants to know who she needs to apologize to." "What did you tell her?" I asked, though I already knew Derek well enough to predict his response. "Told her it wasn't my place to get in the middle of your relationship business. But Blake, she's falling apart. Whatever happened, maybe you should just talk to her." The weekend brought Madison's most desperate moves yet. She contacted my supervisor at the community college, claiming she was worried about my mental health and asking if I'd seemed distressed at work. Dr. Peterson, the department head, mentioned it casually during our Monday staff meeting, not realizing he was stepping into relationship drama. "Blake, I had an interesting call from someone claiming to be your girlfriend. Wanted to know if you'd been acting strangely lately." I told her that was inappropriate and hung up, but thought you should know. The fact that Madison had tried to involve my workplace in our personal issues crossed a line I hadn't expected her to cross. It showed a level of desperation that made me realize she was beginning to understand this wasn't just a temporary argument that would blow over with enough persistence. Her final message of the week was the longest yet, arriving Sunday night as I was preparing lesson plans for my Tuesday classes. "Blake, I know I messed up badly at Derek's party. I said horrible things that I didn't mean, and I understand why you're angry. But please don't let one terrible conversation destroy everything we've built together. I love you, and I know you love me too. We can work through this if you'll just give me a chance to make it right. 3 years has to count for something. Please call me back." Tuesday evening brought an unexpected knock on my door that changed everything. I expected to see Madison's face through the peephole, but instead found Emma, her younger sister, standing on my front steps looking nervous and determined. Emma was 26, a graduate student in social work at the University of Minnesota, and someone I'd always found easier to talk to than Madison despite seeing her only at family gatherings and holidays. Where Madison was polished and image-conscious, Emma had a natural warmth that made people feel comfortable sharing their problems, probably why she'd chosen social work as her career path. "Blake, I hope you don't mind me showing up like this, but I needed to talk to you about what happened at Derek's party," she said, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the October chill. "Madison doesn't know I'm here, and honestly, she'd probably kill me if she found out, but I can't just sit back and watch this mess without saying something." I invited her in, curious about what perspective she might offer that I hadn't already considered. Emma had always been the more grounded of the two sisters, pursuing her master's degree while working part-time at a crisis intervention center, living in a modest apartment near campus instead of chasing the luxury lifestyle that seemed to define Madison's choices. She settled onto my couch with the careful posture of someone preparing to deliver difficult news. "First, I want to apologize for what my sister said about you," Emma began, her voice steady but clearly emotional. "I wasn't at the party, but Derek's girlfriend called me afterward because she was so upset by Madison's comments. Apparently, the whole conversation was even worse than what you overheard." My stomach dropped. "Worse how?" "Madison didn't just say you weren't marriage material. She told her friends that she was planning to manipulate you into proposing by getting pregnant, and that once you were locked in, she could work on upgrading your ambition to match her lifestyle expectations." The room felt like it had tilted sideways. I'd been processing the betrayal of learning Madison saw me as a temporary placeholder, but discovering she'd been actively planning to trap me into marriage was a completely different level of deception. Blake, she's been lying to you about being on birth control for the past 2 months, Emma continued, her social worker training evident in how carefully she delivered this devastating information. She told her friends she was tracking ovulation and taking fertility supplements, planning to announce a pregnancy right after you proposed. She thought having a baby would force both of you to grow up and commit to the kind of serious relationship she could be proud of publicly. I sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Madison had been planning to fundamentally alter both our lives based on manipulation and deception, treating pregnancy as a tool to achieve her relationship goals rather than a mutual decision between partners who wanted to build a family together. The engagement ring I'd returned to the jewelry store suddenly felt like a bullet I'd narrowly dodged. "There's something else," Emma said, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever came next. "I've had feelings for you since we first met 2 years ago. I know that's terrible timing and probably the last thing you want to hear right now, but watching Madison treat you this way when I've seen how genuinely good you are has been eating me alive." The confession caught me completely off guard. Emma had always been friendly during family dinners and holiday gatherings, asking thoughtful questions about my work and seeming genuinely interested in my emergency response training programs. I'd assumed her attention was just politeness, the kind of inclusive behavior you'd expect from someone studying to become a counselor. "Emma, I had no idea," I said, trying to process this new information alongside everything else she'd revealed. "I always thought you were just being nice because I was dating your sister." "I was being nice because you're actually worth being nice to," she replied with a slight smile. "Blake, do you know how rare it is to find someone who chose their career specifically to help other people? Madison sees your work as something to be embarrassed about, but I think it's incredible. The crisis center where I work has paramedics come in all the time, and they're some of the most genuinely caring people I've ever met." Before I could respond to this unexpected revelation, we both heard a car door slam outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of Madison's voice calling my name. Emma's face went pale as footsteps approached the front door, and we both realized how this situation was about to look to Madison, her boyfriend and her sister having an intimate conversation in his living room while she'd been desperately trying to reach him for a week. "Blake, I know you're in there," Madison shouted, pounding on the door with increasing intensity. "Your neighbor said she saw someone go in, and I'm not leaving until we talk." I looked at Emma, who was clearly torn between wanting to escape before Madison saw her and feeling like running away would make the situation worse. The pounding on the door continued, growing more frantic with each unanswered moment. "Maybe I should go," Emma whispered, but before I could respond, Madison's voice changed to something closer to panic. "Blake, please, I have something important to tell you. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby, and I've been trying to tell you for days." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. "She's not pregnant," she said quietly. "She was just planning to be. This is exactly the kind of desperate manipulation I was warning you about." I opened the door to find Madison looking disheveled and wild-eyed, clearly having worked herself into an emotional frenzy over the past week of being ignored. Her usually perfect appearance was replaced by unwashed hair, smudged makeup, and clothes that looked like she'd slept in them. The moment she saw Emma sitting on my couch, her expression shifted from desperate relief to shock and then to fury. "What the hell is my sister doing here?" Madison demanded, pushing past me into the living room. "Emma, what are you doing? How long have you been here? Blake, why is she here when you won't even return my calls?" Emma stood up slowly, her social work training helping her remain calm in what was rapidly becoming a volatile situation. "Madison, I came here to apologize for the things you said about Blake at Derek's party. Things that were completely inappropriate and hurtful." "You came here to apologize for things I said?" Madison's voice was getting higher and more strained. "Since when do you speak for me? And how do you even know what I said?" "Because Derek's girlfriend was so upset by your comments that she called me," Emma replied with quiet strength. "She was worried about Blake and thought someone in your family should know how badly you'd hurt him." Madison turned to me with accusation blazing in her eyes. "So you've been talking to my family behind my back? turning my own sister against me instead of just having a conversation with me like an adult. I didn't turn anyone against you, Madison, I said, finally finding my voice in this surreal confrontation. Emma came here on her own to apologize for your behavior. Which, by the way, is something you should have done yourself instead of showing up at my workplace and harassing my supervisor. I was worried about you, she screamed, and I could see tears starting to form. You disappeared for a week without explanation. I thought something terrible had happened. Something terrible did happen, I replied calmly. I learned that my girlfriend of 3 years thinks I'm an embarrassment she's settling for until someone better comes along. Madison's face crumpled as she realized I wasn't going to be manipulated by tears or declarations of pregnancy. Emma stepped forward slightly, positioning herself between Madison and me with the protective instincts of someone trained to de-escalate crisis situations. Madison, you need to stop this right now, Emma said firmly. You can't lie about being pregnant to manipulate Blake into staying with you. That's not fair to him, and it's not fair to the idea of bringing a child into this mess. How dare you? Madison whirled on her sister with venom I'd never seen from her before. How dare you come here and sabotage my relationship? You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to steal my boyfriend when I'm at my lowest point. I'm not trying to steal anyone, Emma replied, though I noticed her cheeks flush slightly. I'm trying to prevent you from destroying your life with lies and manipulation. The next morning, I insisted Madison take a pregnancy test at an urgent care clinic rather than relying on home tests that could be misinterpreted or manipulated. Derek met us there for moral support, and his presence seemed to calm the volatile situation that had exploded in my living room the night before. Madison had spent an hour cycling between tears, anger, and desperate promises to change before finally agreeing to prove her pregnancy claim with medical documentation. Dr. Walsh, the clinic physician, was thorough and professional as she explained the blood test results to Madison in a private room while Derek and I waited in the lobby. When Madison emerged 20 minutes later, her face told the story before she said a word. I'm not pregnant, she admitted quietly, unable to meet my eyes. The doctor said I had elevated hormone levels from the fertility supplements I'd been taking, which made the home tests show false positives. I honestly thought I was pregnant. Derek looked between Madison and me with the expression of someone who'd walked into a movie halfway through and was trying to piece together the plot. Wait, what fertility supplements? I thought you two weren't even engaged yet. That's when the whole story came tumbling out. Madison confessed to taking over-the-counter fertility enhancers for the past 2 months, lying about her birth control, and tracking her ovulation cycle with the intention of getting pregnant before I proposed. She'd convinced herself that an unplanned pregnancy would force both of us to commit to a more serious relationship and give her leverage to push me toward career changes that would improve our financial situation. I wasn't trying to trap you, Madison said, though her words rang hollow even to her own ears. I just thought if we had a baby together, you'd realize we needed to think bigger about our future. Maybe consider that corporate training position at Medtronic, or look into management roles that pay more than teaching. The corporate training position she referenced was something I'd mentioned months ago, a high-paying role with a medical device company that would have meant giving up my teaching work and community involvement to focus purely on profit-driven training for sales teams. I'd rejected it immediately because it went against everything I valued about my career, but apparently Madison had been holding on to it as evidence that I was choosing to limit our financial potential. Derek's construction site experience had given him a healthy skepticism about people who made promises under pressure, and he wasn't buying Madison's attempt to reframe her deception as concern for our future. So you lied about birth control, took fertility drugs, and planned to announce a pregnancy you hoped would pressure Blake into proposing and changing careers, Derek summarized with brutal clarity. That's not thinking about your future together. That's sabotage. While Madison tried to defend her actions to Derek, I found myself thinking about Emma's revelation from the night before. Emma had been volunteering at a crisis intervention center while pursuing her master's degree, choosing to work with people in their darkest moments because she genuinely wanted to help. The contrast with Madison's approach to problem-solving was stark. Where Emma sought to support and strengthen, Madison had chosen manipulation and deception. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to details about Madison's behavior that I'd previously overlooked or excused. I discovered she'd been telling her real estate colleagues that I was a firefighter captain rather than a paramedic instructor, apparently thinking the promotion would make me sound more impressive. She'd also been looking at engagement rings far beyond what my salary could reasonably afford, sending screenshots to her friends of $15,000 settings while knowing I made $47,000 a year between my paramedic work and teaching income. Derek helped me piece together more of Madison's social media presence, which painted a picture of our relationship that bore little resemblance to reality. She'd posted photos of my converted ambulance with captions about authentic vintage style, rather than acknowledging it was a practical vehicle I'd bought for $8,000. Pictures from our volunteer work at the homeless shelter were tagged with phrases like giving back and community leaders, making it seem like charitable work was a shared passion rather than something she joined for photo opportunities. Most telling was a post from 3 months ago where she'd shared an article about high-earning paramedics in California, adding the comment, "Career goals for my amazing boyfriend. So proud of his dedication to helping others." The implication was clear. She was proud of my work only when she could frame it as a stepping stone to something more lucrative. Meanwhile, Emma had been quietly supporting causes that aligned with my actual values. I learned from Derek's girlfriend that Emma had been volunteering with a program that taught basic first aid to homeless individuals, something she'd never mentioned during our limited interactions at family gatherings. She'd also been working on her thesis about trauma-informed care in emergency services, research that could genuinely help improve how first responders supported people in crisis. When Emma called me later that week to check on how I was processing everything that had happened, our conversation revealed shared perspectives I'd never experienced with Madison. "I've been thinking about what you said about choosing work that helps people," Emma said during our phone call. "My professor at the university always tells us that meaningful work isn't about the salary, it's about the impact. You're literally saving lives and training other people to save lives. How is that not impressive enough for someone who claims to love you?" The question highlighted something that had been bothering me since the night at Derek's party. Madison had never asked detailed questions about my emergency response training courses, never shown curiosity about the techniques I was teaching or the lives those skills might save. She'd treated my work as a resume line rather than something that defined who I was as a person. Emma, by contrast, asked thoughtful questions about trauma response protocols and seemed genuinely interested in how my teaching methods had evolved over the years. "I've always wondered how you handle the emotional weight of emergency work," Emma continued. "At the Crisis Center, we have debriefing sessions and peer support programs. Do paramedics have similar resources?" It was the kind of question that showed she understood the psychological demands of helping professions, something Madison had never acknowledged despite dating me for 3 years. Our conversation lasted 2 hours, covering everything from the challenges of working with trauma survivors to the satisfaction of watching students master life-saving techniques. For the first time in months, I felt understood by someone who appreciated both the difficulties and rewards of my career choice. The investigation into Madison's deception revealed one final disturbing detail when Derek's girlfriend mentioned seeing Madison at an upscale jewelry store in Edina, apparently telling the sales associate that her fiancé would be coming in to make a purchase soon. The salesperson had showed Madison rings in the $12,000 to $18,000 range, well beyond anything I could afford, and Madison had apparently provided my name and contact information for follow-up calls about financing options. The presumption that I would not only propose but also go into debt for a ring she'd selected without my input felt like the final confirmation that Madison had been planning our entire future without caring about my actual preferences or financial reality. The confrontation with Madison's parents came sooner than expected when they arrived unannounced at my duplex the following Saturday morning, expecting to discuss wedding plans based on what Madison had apparently told them about our relationship status. Richard and Patricia Hamilton stepped out of their luxury SUV looking like they were slumming it in my working-class neighborhood, their expressions suggesting they'd never ventured into northeast Minneapolis before and weren't impressed with what they found. "Blake, we need to talk," Richard announced without preamble, his investment banker demeanor making it clear this wasn't a social visit. "Madison called us last night, Extremely upset about some misunderstanding between you two. We're here to help sort this out before things get completely out of hand. Patricia, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, surveyed my duplex with barely concealed disapproval. She said you'd been planning to propose but got cold feet because of something her friends said at a party. Honestly, Blake, I thought you were more mature than to let gossip interfere with your relationship. The assumption that I was the problem in this situation, combined with their obvious disdain for my living situation, immediately put me on the defensive. These were people who'd always treated me politely but distantly during family gatherings, making small talk about my work while clearly viewing me as a temporary fixture in their daughter's life. Now they were standing in my living room acting like disappointed parents whose child's toy had broken. Actually, the issue isn't gossip, I said carefully, trying to maintain respect for Emma's parents despite the circumstances. Madison and I have fundamental differences about what we want from a relationship and our future together. What kind of differences? Richard demanded, his tone suggesting he was accustomed to resolving problems through direct confrontation and financial pressure. Madison is a successful woman with clear goals and expectations. She deserves a partner who can match her ambition and provide the lifestyle she's worked hard to achieve. The phrase, match her ambition, stung because it echoed exactly what Madison had said at Derek's party about needing someone with real money and status. Her parents had clearly been part of shaping the worldview that made her see my career as insufficient rather than valuable. I respect Madison's goals, I replied, but I'm not willing to change my entire career path to meet financial expectations that were never part of our original relationship agreement. Patricia's expression softened slightly, probably recognizing that I wasn't going to be easily bullied into compliance. Blake, we understand that your work is important to you, but surely you can see that Madison needs security. She's been clear about wanting a family and a stable home. Those things require financial planning and realistic career decisions. Before I could respond to this thinly veiled criticism of my earning potential, Emma's voice came from the front steps. Actually, Mom, Madison's been lying to all of us about what she really wants. Emma walked into my living room with the confidence of someone who'd finally decided to stop enabling her sister's manipulative behavior. She was carrying a folder of documents that she set on my coffee table with deliberate precision. Emma, what are you doing here? Patricia asked, clearly confused by her younger daughter's unexpected appearance and serious demeanor. I'm here because someone needs to tell you the truth about what Madison has been planning, Emma replied, opening the folder to reveal printed screenshots of text messages and social media posts. Blake didn't get cold feet about proposing. He discovered that Madison has been lying about birth control, planning to trap him with a pregnancy, and telling her friends that he's just a temporary placeholder until she finds someone with more money. Richard's face went through several expressions as Emma methodically presented evidence of Madison's deception. Screenshots of Madison's texts to her friends about the pregnancy plan, photos of the expensive engagement rings she'd been looking at without consulting me, and printouts of her social media posts that misrepresented my career and our relationship dynamics. She's been calling Blake a paramedic instructor embarrassing and lying to her colleagues about what he actually does for work, Emma continued, her social worker training evident in how she presented facts without emotional manipulation. Meanwhile, she's been taking fertility supplements and tracking ovulation while telling Blake she was on birth control. Patricia sat down heavily in my worn armchair, processing the documentation of her daughter's elaborate deception. Emma, how do you know all this? Why do you have screenshots of Madison's private messages? Because her friends have been sharing this stuff for months, thinking it was funny that she was managing her boyfriend's career expectations, Emma replied with obvious disgust. And because I've been watching her treat someone I care about like a project to be improved rather than a person to be loved. The admission that Emma cared about me came out more directly than either of us had planned, and Richard immediately picked up on the implication. Emma, please tell me you're not romantically interested in your sister's boyfriend, he said, his banker's instincts recognizing a potential scandal that could damage the family's reputation. Blake is not Madison's boyfriend anymore, Emma replied firmly. Madison ended that relationship when she decided to build a future based on lies and manipulation. And yes, I have feelings for Blake, But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because someone needs to advocate for a man who spent 3 years being told he's not good enough when he's actually the most genuinely caring person our family has ever known. Patricia looked between Emma and me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Blake, is this true? Are you and Madison really over? We're over, I confirmed. Madison made it clear that she sees my career as something to be ashamed of and my lifestyle as something to be endured temporarily. That's not a foundation for marriage or a family. Richard stood up abruptly and pulled out his wallet, an action so predictable that I almost laughed. Look, Blake, let's be practical about this. Madison made some poor choices, but she's young and she'll learn from this experience. How much would it take for you to give her another chance? Or if you're determined to end things, how much would it cost for you to walk away quietly and let both girls move on with their lives? The offer to pay me off was so insulting that I felt Emma stiffen beside me, her protective instincts clearly activated by her father's crude attempt to reduce everything to a financial transaction. Mr. Hamilton, I don't want your money, I said as calmly as I could manage. I want what I've always wanted, a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. Madison can't provide that, but Emma has shown me in just a few conversations that she understands what partnership actually means. This is ridiculous, Patricia said, standing up and gathering her purse. Emma, you're throwing away your sister's happiness for some fantasy about a man who will never be able to provide the life you deserve. Blake, I'm sorry, but you're not what either of our daughters needs for a successful future. Emma's response surprised everyone in the room, including herself. Mom, Blake saves lives for a living and teaches other people to save lives. He volunteers at homeless shelters and spends his free time helping people in crisis. He's never asked me to change anything about myself or my goals. How is that not exactly what I need? The strength in Emma's voice when she defended me felt like vindication for every moment I doubted my own worth during Madison's subtle campaign to make me feel inadequate. Here was someone who saw my work as valuable, my character as admirable, and my future as something she wanted to share rather than something she needed to fix. Richard and Patricia left my duplex looking shell-shocked, probably trying to figure out how to explain to their social circle that one daughter had sabotaged her relationship through deception while the other had fallen for a working-class paramedic. I honestly didn't care what they told their friends. For the first time in months, I felt like someone saw me clearly and liked what they found. 6 months later, Emma and I were planning our engagement party at the Northeast Community Center where I taught my emergency response courses, surrounded by the people who'd always valued my work and character rather than my bank account balance. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was getting engaged in the same building where I'd processed Madison's betrayal, but this time the ring came with genuine excitement rather than desperate hope for someone's approval. Emma had deferred her PhD program for a year to help me expand my training programs into a non-profit organization that would serve at-risk youth in Minneapolis, combining her social work expertise with my emergency response background to create mentorship opportunities for kids aging out of foster care like Derek and I had years ago. We'd moved into a larger duplex together, one that served as both our home and a meeting space for the weekly support groups Emma facilitated for teenagers transitioning out of the system. Derek had been our biggest supporter from the beginning, probably because he recognized in Emma the kind of partner who enhanced rather than diminished the person she loved. Man, watching you two plan this nonprofit together is like seeing what a real partnership looks like, he'd said while helping us paint the new meeting room. Madison always made it seem like your goals were obstacles to overcome. Emma treats them like adventures to share. The contrast between my relationships became even clearer during the engagement planning process. Where Madison had researched venues that would photograph well for social media, Emma chose the community center because it represented the work we were building together. Where Madison had focused on guest lists that would impress her colleagues, Emma invited the foster kids we mentored, my fellow paramedics, and the volunteers from the homeless shelter where we'd been working side by side for months. Madison had moved to Denver after the confrontation with her parents, taking a position with a high-end real estate firm that specialized in luxury mountain properties. According to Derek's girlfriend, who occasionally heard updates through mutual friends, Madison was dating a surgeon she'd met at a charity gala and seemed to be rebuilding the image-conscious lifestyle she'd always wanted. I genuinely hoped she'd found what she was looking for, though I suspected she'd learned very little from our relationship about the difference between partnership and performance. 3 weeks before our engagement party, an envelope arrived with Madison's familiar handwriting and a Denver return address. Inside was a 2-page letter that surprised me with its apparent honesty and self-reflection. "Blake, I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I've been in therapy for the past 4 months trying to understand why I treated you so badly. My therapist helped me realize that I was so focused on achieving the lifestyle I thought would make me happy that I completely lost sight of what actually matters in a relationship. You deserved someone who appreciated your dedication to helping others, not someone who saw it as a problem to be solved. I also owe Emma an apology for the terrible things I said about her feelings for you. Watching your engagement announcement on social media, I can see that she loves you the way you always deserve to be loved. I'm genuinely happy for both of you, even though I know I have no right to your forgiveness. I hope your nonprofit helps a lot of kids who need the kind of support you would have benefited from growing up. Take care of yourself, Madison." Emma read the letter over my shoulder while we sat in our kitchen, surrounded by supplies for the engagement party we were hosting the next day. "That actually sounds like growth," she said thoughtfully. "I'm glad she's getting help. Are you okay with her reaching out?" I asked, genuinely concerned about how the contact might affect Emma's relationship with her sister. They'd been maintaining minimal communication since the family confrontation, mostly through their parents who were still adjusting to the reality that their younger daughter had chosen a paramedic over their older daughter's expectations. "I'm fine with it," Emma replied, taking my hand across the table. Madison needed to take accountability for what she did, and this letter feels like a real apology rather than another manipulation. Besides, I'm too happy about tomorrow to let anything she says bother me. The engagement party exceeded every expectation I'd had about celebrating important milestones with people who actually mattered. The community center was filled with foster kids who'd become like younger siblings, paramedics and firefighters who'd supported my career from the beginning, and social workers from Emma's program who understood the importance of the nonprofit we were building together. Captain Rodriguez gave a toast about the importance of finding someone who makes you better rather than someone who makes you feel inadequate, a comment that drew knowing looks from everyone who'd watched me struggle through the final months of my relationship with Madison. Derek's speech focused on how Emma had helped me rediscover the confidence that Madison's constant criticism had gradually eroded. "Blake spent 3 years apologizing for being exactly who he was supposed to be," Derek said, raising his beer toward Emma. "Thank you for helping him remember that he never needed fixing." When it came time for my proposal, I used the simple ring Emma and I had picked out together during a quiet afternoon at a local jewelry store, nothing flashy or expensive, just something that represented our shared values and practical approach to building a life together. "Emma, you've shown me what it means to be loved for who I actually am rather than who someone wants me to become," I said, surrounded by people who'd watched both relationships unfold and understood the significance of this moment. "Will you marry me and keep building something real together?" Her yes came with tears of joy rather than the calculated excitement Madison had always shown when discussing our theoretical future. Looking around the room at the faces of people who genuinely cared about our happiness, I realized that Madison had been right about one thing. I wasn't marriage material for someone who needed a lifestyle upgrade and social status symbol. But I was exactly the right person for someone who wanted a partner, an equal, and a teammate in making the world a little better than we found it. The ring might have been modest, and our venue might have been a community center instead of a country club, but the love was real in ways I'd never experienced before. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's building something beautiful with someone who actually deserves your best efforts.